It's pretty well documented last summer's Team USA team was one of, if not the most disappointing teams in recent history, as they lost 3 out of 8 games and didn't even medal. Definitely a pretty big black eye on what should be the best team in the world. Now, on this roster, their one lone bright spot was indeed Anthony Edwards, as Ant for the entire tournament averaged 19 points, the highest on the team, and just under 5 boards, also the highest. He was clearing away Team USA's best player and their most consistent, and late in games, if they needed a bucket, they're going to Ant Edwards every single time. Watching Ant in this tournament, it was pretty self-evident this guy was taking some type of leap into superstardom. But the question remained, could he take that leap into the actual NBA season? Now look, so far in a small sample size, it looks like Ant, yet again age 22, is taking a massive leap. As in the past week alone, he's had 2 big statement games versus championship contenders to kind of declare, I have arrived. First off, they got a huge win versus Denver, who entering the matchup was undefeated. Ant in this game had a team-high 24 points and a blowout victory. In the fourth quarter, could have easily had 30-35 points if he wasn't sat down because of the blowout. And for a Denver-led team with Jokic, them losing by 20 plus doesn't happen often. Now, looking at the second statement game, this was peak Ant Edwards versus the Boston Celtics, as once again at home, he's playing an undefeated team who was the best in the conference. And Ant in this game had game-high 38 points, 9 boards, 7 assists on 60% shooting, and from start to finish was dominant on both ends of the floor. And what made it more impressive, his all-star teammate, or supposed all-star teammate Karl Towns, was in foul trouble all night and eventually did foul out. So for the majority of overtime, Ant Edwards was going solo versus the Boston Celtics and their elite starting 5. And what really stuck out to me was Edwards taking the challenge of guarding Jason Tatum. And he didn't just take the challenge attempt to guard him, he guarded Tatum and did a great job. As in overtime, Tatum only had 4 points to Edwards' 8. And numerous times Edwards kinda alpha dog Tatum, bullied him, and a couple times just poked the ball away and stole it from him straight up. And for someone like Tatum, a legit top 7, some say top 5 guy, who's built pretty well, for Edwards to do that to him was definitely a huge statement to the entire NBA. And if you look at that box score yet again, having 38, 9, and 7 is definitely highly impressive. But in terms of an overall stat sheet, Ant Edwards has had more impressive games. But taking into account the opponent who he was playing, played lockdown on both ends of the floor, I think this game for Ant Edwards was the best game of his career to date. And looking at him so far this year, since opening night where he stumbled out of the gate, shooting 8 of 27 versus Toronto, since that game, he's been automatic and on fire, averaging 28.6 points, 5.6 assists, 5.2 boards, on 58% shooting from the field, and 45% from behind the arc. In large part due to Ant Edwards, Minnesota, right now is a top 5 team in the West, has won 4 out of the last 5 games, and beat 2 contenders in the process. And looking at the entire NBA, Edwards, right now at only age 22, ranks 8th in the NBA in scoring, just behind Jokic. And out of the top 10 scorers, there's only 2 guys under 25 in that top 10. Of course, one being Ant, and the other Cam Thomas. Now, Cam is a great player, but primarily is a score first player, score second player, and score third player. That's his job. For Ant Edwards to be top 10 in scoring at 22, being a scorer, facilitator, and great defender, leading his team in assists, that's a pretty massive statement. Now, looking at Minnesota's overall team, in my view and many, it's not built for Ant Edwards to reach his true potential. Could he still get there? Yes, he could. But he's almost fighting against his own team to reach that potential because again, Minnesota isn't built to fit Edwards' game. As these 2 big lineups they run, 3 big lineups they run, are just kind of awkward offensively and really not conducive to a player like Edwards. And looking at their overall offensive rating, they aren't even top 20 in that category, the worst of any playoff team at this moment. But defensively, right now, they're actually the best team in the league, ranking first. And someone like Gobert, despite being massively overpaid, is actually playing really great basketball on the defensive end. Long term for Minnesota, I'm not really a fan of them or believer in their overall roster. But what I do believe in is Edwards himself and his overall ability to carry this team that isn't built for him. And oddly enough, Minnesota, having this wonky big lineup, versus two of the best teams in the NBA, it actually kind of matches up well versus those specific teams, as the Wings of Boston struggled big time getting to the paint, actually finishing at the rim. And someone like Jokic, despite being Jokic getting his, it's much harder versus 2 7-footers in the paint who have it on lock. And if you look at last year's playoffs, Minnesota, actually in the Western Conference, kind of gave Denver the best run for their money. Yes, it was the first round, but it was highly competitive. And Ant individually in this series, he averaged 31.6 points and had a 40-piece in Game 2. Look, the Timberwolves weren't winning that series, but it was highly competitive and kind of off-putting to see Minnesota match up versus Denver so well. And looking at one of those awkward bigs, you have Karl Anthony Towns, who I think finally, thank God, has passed the torch to Edwards. Something honestly that should have happened last year. As Cat nowadays, his numbers across the board are just tanked, shooting below 40%, not even averaging 20 points per game. And at this point, Cat, he kind of is who he is. He's 27 in his 9th season and really kind of plateauing and not getting any better. And someone like Naz Reid actually, this point in the season, is a more consistent and a better offensive teammate for Ant Edwards in comparison to Cat. All in all, for Ant Edwards, I am super high on him and his potential at only age 22. With that being said though, him being in Minnesota, I hope I'm wrong, but his career most likely to end up like Kevin Garnett. Being a great player, top 10, top 5, MVP type guy who is saddled with bad rosters, bad management, and subpar help. Hopefully Ant one day gets adequate help, a team that fits him, but knowing Minnesota, it probably isn't going to happen. And the last thing I do want to say about Edwards, him only being 22 years old is kind of frightening. As coming to the NBA at age 19, he's been a 20 point per game guy really since the jump. And coming into the draft, Edwards of course had some hype, but largely people were skeptical about him, his overall motor and motivation. And some fans even dubbed him Andrew Wiggins 2.0. Of course, that didn't come true, but Edwards' overall ascent so early, it really is kind of shocking. Again, only 22 years old. What he's doing is like Luka Doncic type stuff, Tatum type stuff at that same age. And coming into the year, ESPN had Edwards as the 13th best player in the NBA. A pretty respectable rating. What I'm saying by the end of the year, Edwards could be pushing top 10 depending on how the playoffs play out and how Edwards finishes his season. As always, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.